Section 50 of Gray's Anatomy, Part 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Anatomy of the Human Body, Part 2, by Henry Gray. The Muscles and Fasciae of the Thigh, Part 1. 1. The anterior femoral muscles. Sartorius, quadriceps femoris, rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, articularis genu. Superficial fascia. The superficial fascia forms a continuous layer over the whole of the thigh. It consists of areolar tissue containing in its meshes much fat, and may be separated into two or more layers, between which are found the superficial vessels and nerves. It varies in thickness in different parts of the limb. In the groin it is thick, and the two layers are separated from one another by the superficial inguinal lymph glands, the great saphenous vein, and several smaller vessels. The superficial layer is continuous above with the superficial fascia of the abdomen. The deep layer of the superficial fascia is a very thin, fibrous stratum, best marked on the medial side of the great saphenous vein and below the inguinal ligament. It is placed beneath the subcutaneous vessels and nerves and upon the surface of the fascia lata. It is intimately adherent to the fascia lata, a little below the inguinal ligament. It covers the fossa ovalis, saphenous opening, being closely united to its circumference, and is connected to the sheath of the femoral vessels. The portion of fascia covering this fossa is perforated by the great saphenous vein and by numerous blood and lymphatic vessels. Hence it has been termed the fascia cribrosa, the openings for these vessels having been likened to the holes in a sieve. A large subcutaneous bursa is found in the superficial fascia over the patella. Deep fascia. The deep fascia of the thigh is named, from its great extent, the fascia lata. It constitutes an investment for the whole of this region of the limb, but varies in thickness in different parts. Thus it is thicker in the upper and lateral part of the thigh, where it receives a fibrous expansion from the gluteus maximus, and where the tensor fasciae lati is inserted between its layers. It is very thin behind and at the upper and medial part, where it covers the adductor muscles and again becomes stronger around the knee, receiving fibrous expansions from the tendon of the biceps femoris laterally, from the sartorius medially, and from the quadriceps femoris in front. The fascia lata is attached, above and behind, to the back of the sacrum and coccyx, laterally to the iliac crest, in front to the inguinal ligament, and to the superior ramus of the pubis, and medially to the inferior ramus of the pubis, to the inferior ramus and tuberosity of the ischium, and to the lower border of the sacrotuberous ligament. From its attachment to the iliac crest, it passes down over the gluteus medius to the upper border of the gluteus maximus, where it splits into two layers, one passing superficial to and the other beneath this muscle. At the lower border of the muscle the two layers reunite. Laterally, the fascia lata receives the greater part of the tendon of insertion of the gluteus maximus and becomes proportionately thickened. The portion of the fascia lata attached to the front part of the iliac crest and corresponding to the origin of the tensor fasciae lati extends down the lateral side of the thigh as two layers, one superficial to and the other beneath this muscle. At the lower end of the muscle these two layers unite and form a strong band, having first received the insertion of the muscle. This band is continued downward under the name of the iliotibial band, tractus iliotibialis, and is attached to the lateral condyle of the tibia. The part of the iliotibial band which lies beneath the tensor fasciae lati is prolonged upward to join the lateral part of the capsule of the hip joint. Below, the fascia lata is attached to all the prominent points around the knee joint, viz., the condyles of the femur and tibia, and the head of the fibula. On either side of the patella it is strengthened by transverse fibers from the lower parts of the vasti, which are attached to and support this bone. Of these, the lateral are the stronger, and are continuous with the iliotibial band. The deep surface of the fascia lata gives off two strong intermuscular septa, which are attached to the whole length of the linea aspera and its prolongations above and below. The lateral and stronger one, which extends from the insertion of the gluteus maximus to the lateral condyle, separates the vastus lateralis in front from the short head of the biceps femoris behind, and gives partial origin to these muscles. The medial and thinner one separates the vastus medialis from the adductores and pectineus. Besides these, there are numerous smaller septa, separating the individual muscles and enclosing each in a distinct sheath. The fossa ovalis, saphenous opening. At the upper and medial part of the thigh, a little below the medial end of the inguinal ligament, is a large oval-shaped aperture in the fascia lata. It transmits the great saphenous vein and other smaller vessels, and is termed the fossa ovalis. The fascia cribrosa, which is pierced by the structures passing through the opening, closes the aperture and must be removed to expose it. The fascia lata in this part of the thigh is described as consisting of a superficial and a deep portion. The superficial portion of the fascia lata is the part on the lateral side of the fossa ovalis. It is attached laterally to the crest and anterior superior spine of the ilium, to the whole length of the inguinal ligament, and to the pectineal line in conjunction with the lacunar ligament. From the tubercle of the pubis it is reflected downward and lateralward as an arched margin, the fossiform margin. Forming the lateral boundary of the fossa ovalis, this margin overlies and is adherent to the anterior layer of the sheath of the femoral vessels. To its edge is attached the fascia cribrosa. The upward and medial prolongation of the fossiform margin is named the superior cornu. Its downward and medial prolongation the inferior cornu. The latter is well defined, and is continuous behind the great saphenous vein with the pectineal fascia. The deep portion is situated on the medial side of the fossa ovalis, and at the lower margin of the fossa is continuous with the superficial portion. Traced upward, it covers the pectineus, adductor longus, and gracilis, and, passing behind the sheath of the femoral vessels, to which it is closely united, is continuous with the iliopectineal fascia, and is attached to the pectineal line. From this description it may be observed that the superficial portion of the fascia lata lies in front of the femoral vessels, and the deep portion behind them, so that an apparent aperture exists between the two, through which the great saphenous passes to join the femoral vein. The sartorius, the longest muscle in the body, is narrow and ribbon-like. It arises by tendinous fibers from the anterior superior iliac spine and the upper half of the notch below it. It passes obliquely across the upper and anterior part of the thigh, from the lateral to the medial side of the limb, then descends vertically as far as the medial side of the knee, passing behind the medial condyle of the femur to end in a tendon. This curves obliquely forward and expands into a broad aponeurosis, which is inserted in front of the gracilis and semitendinous into the upper part of the medial surface of the body of the tibia, nearly as far forward as the anterior crest. The upper part of the aponeurosis is curved backward over the upper edge of the tendon of the gracilis so as to be inserted behind it. An offset from its upper margin blends with the capsule of the knee joint, and another from its lower border, with the fascia on the medial side of the leg. Variations. Slips of origin from the outer end of the inguinal ligament, the notch of the ilium, the iliopectineal line, or the pubis occur. The muscle may be split into two parts, and one part may be inserted into the fascia lata, the femur, the ligament of the patella, or the tendon of the semitendinosus. The tendon of insertion may end in the fascia lata, the capsule of the knee joint, or the fascia of the leg. The muscle may be absent. The quadriceps femoris, quadriceps extensor, includes the four remaining muscles on the front of the thigh. It is the great extensor muscle of the leg, forming a large fleshy mass which covers the front and sides of the femur. It is subdivided into separate portions, which have received distinctive names. One occupying the middle of the thigh, and connected above with the ilium, is called from its straight course the rectus femoris. The other three